So I was asked to talk about biodiversity needs credible nature-based solutions, and I've snuck in climate and people into the title as well, because I think we need to think about those different aspects all at the same time. Otherwise, we might go for the wrong kind of solutions. So I'd like to talk about three things. The first one, just the need to urgently address the climate and biodiversity crisis and how that is becoming increasingly recognized as well in public, both in business as well as the public more broadly. And in a regular talk, I would now spend the next 15 minutes talking about the crisis. I think that would be preaching to the converted in this room, so I won't take much time for that. But I think it is important, even when we deal with these things on a daily basis, it is important to step back and just remind ourselves again and again how unique this situation is in which we are. Both on the climate side, on your left-hand side here, what you see is the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere over the last 800,000 years. And you can see where we are today is way outside of the range that the climate or that the CO2 concentration has been in that very, very long period. And of course, that is the time in which humanity developed, in which the culture we have today has developed. And on your right-hand side, biodiversity, that's the Living Planet Index, a measure that WWF uses. What it looks at is the decline of vertebrate populations worldwide, where we have long-time data. And you see that on average, these vertebrate populations have declined by over 2/3 in 50 years. Again, that is an absolutely unique situation. And it's just important to keep that sort of in the background. We're not just here because we think nature's cool. We're here because we're in an existential crisis that we need to deal with. I always talk about biodiversity and climate crisis together. That's two sides of the same coin. And that's being increasingly recognized by science, that we need to solve both crises. We cannot address one without addressing the other, or we end up doing really stupid things, like planting monocultures of non-native species in a place where it just completely devastates the local ecosystems and wreaks havoc on the water level and things like that. So we always have to make sure we think of these two aspects of the crisis in tandem. And let's not forget about people. This is a report cooperation we did with the Red Cross as WWF. That used to be sort of thought of as different things. We always have to think about how can we work with nature, how can we work with people, how do these aspects come together? And that being increasingly recognized, I think, fundamentally changes how we go about solving these problems. And often in the past, it's kind of felt like this, like during COVID, we're down there, we're being told, wash your hands and everything's going to be well. And people kind of see the COVID crisis. Maybe they can just see the economic recession behind the COVID crisis, but they don't see the larger challenges of climate change and biodiversity collapse. And I think what we're seeing is that is changing now. And I'll just give you one indication for that. You don't have to be able to read this. You just have to be able to see the colors. This is from the Global Risks Perception Survey that the World Economic Forum does, where they ask their members what the most severe risks are for their businesses. And you get a 10-year list and a 2-year list. And I said you only have to see the colors because you'll see that 6 out of 10 on the 10-year list, so 6 out of the 10 largest risks are environmental risks today. That's quite extraordinary. If you go back 10 years, 12 years, there was 0 environmental risks among the top 10. That's a very different situation because then you don't have to tell people why biodiversity and climate are important, but you can work with business leaders about what they can do about it. And that's a very different conversation. And we've had these kind of statements for a while here now. This is Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of England, saying that companies and industries that are not moving towards zero carbon emissions will be punished by investors and will go bankrupt. And that's important, that this isn't just people who love animals. who want to do something. This is, if you want to take care of your business, then you better have these risks on your radar. You better see the opportunities that opens up. Otherwise, you are not doing your job as an executive. And we've had that for a while now regarding climate, and we're starting to see it now also relating to biodiversity. That's non-negotiable for a world looking to chart a course towards a nature-positive future. So there again, we need to address the climate crisis. We need to address the biodiversity crisis at the same time. And these two crises are increasingly being recognized by business leaders and, with a little bit of delay, by political leaders as well. So that leads me on to my second thought, which is, if the recognition is increasingly there that these crises are urgent and that we need to do something about it, then how do we do it? What do we do? It's not why, it's how. And that means, how can we develop the tools we need for a rapid and a credible transformation to net zero and nature positive? And that's something which is one of the main jobs we see at WWF, to which we want to contribute. And I'll give you a few examples. This is a report we did in Denmark last year. We're now redoing it in various other countries together with Bain, where we asked companies about biodiversity risks to their business model. There are 100 largest companies in Denmark, and got a very good response rate, and 70% of respondents said that biodiversity was medium or highly relevant to their businesses. Some of them even said it was more relevant than climate change, because they could mitigate against climate change. They couldn't do anything about biodiversity loss. So 70% said medium to high importance. Only 10% of those companies said they had a strategy for how to deal with it. So it's being recognized, but most companies don't have a clue what to do about it. And that's where we can piggyback on a lot of the tools which have already been developed in the climate space. This is companies taking up, developing science-based targets. So the Science-Based Targets Initiative, which we co-founded with 5 other organizations, and which is now seeing very, very strong uptake worldwide. The one on the right is worldwide, left is Switzerland, and the number of companies has basically doubled within a year that have set themselves science-based targets in the climate space. So not, let's come up with some nice number, but what is the right number if you take a science-based approach to setting climate targets? Now, we can use a lot of the lessons learned there and apply that, and this is a new initiative or not quite that new anymore, set up, called Science-Based Targets for Nature. So developing something similar in the biodiversity space, again allowing companies to set themselves nature-related targets that are science-based. Very important for us and something we're very strongly involved in. And this is something we launched in January on the margins of the World Economic Forum, the WWF Biodiversity Risk Filter. This is a tool that helps companies assess where they have biodiversity risks in their portfolio, both in their own activities, but also in their supply chains. And behind this, there are 50 different sets of databases relating to biodiversity. And it just gives companies, it's free, so companies can upload their data and get an analysis for where and what kind of risks do they face. And then they can go in and actually do something about that. So it's these kind of tools that we try to provide to add value. Or we're currently developing a WWF biodiversity impact assessment tool, which is something for impact investors looking at different opportunities to invest in the biodiversity space, that they can actually look at different opportunities and compare them on a fact-based manner and make investment decisions on that basis. And we're testing that with impact investors. It's a way to help you make a decision, an investment decision, but it then also helps in managing those investments as you go through and helping the companies to ensure that they really have a positive biodiversity impact. That's not just risks, that's really going to see whether there's more biodiversity in the supply chains of a company than beforehand. And I talked about we need a rapid transition. We need a rapid transition, but we also need a credible transition to net zero and nature positive. And that's something which more and more companies are also recognizing because of the dreaded spectre of greenwashing. And you're getting more and more attention to this in the media. I just gave you one example here from last year. This is KLM that came up with the brilliant slogan, "Be a hero, fly CO2 zero." Of course, it was all offsetting. So the Dutch watchdog basically told them off and say that you are misleading your customers, so please stop doing so. And that discussion has become even more poignant with this report that was released in January. Here's an article from The Guardian about it, showing that more than 90% of rainforest carbon offsets were basically worthless. Now, we have to be very careful we don't spill the baby with tip out the baby with the bathwater, but that just shows how careful we have to be in terms of using these kind of tools, that they don't get misused in a way which then damages the entire sector. So we have to go for credibility, otherwise watchdogs get worried, get nervous, investors get worried, and eventually the police shows up. This was Deutsche Bank and DWS last year, where the police actually raided them based on because they said they were greenwashing and misleading clients. So this is becoming more and more of a worry, which is good, because we need to ensure that this is really credible. We don't have the time to faff around with solutions which look good on paper but don't deliver. And the final point, so we need these tools, we need them fast, and they need to be credible. The final point I just wanted to make is that if we want this transformation, if it should be rapid, if it should be credible, then we need to cooperate on a level like we've never cooperated before. This will not work with the business as usual, competitive kind of mindset. That just won't do it. We won't get there fast enough. And I think that's something I like to remind people of. The transition we're in to net zero and nature positive is really way, way beyond business as usual, as we've seen it in the last couple of decades. It's on a par with the Industrial Revolution in terms of how deeply and fundamentally it changes our economies in all sectors. And we're seeing that in energy, we're seeing that in transport, we're seeing it in agriculture, it's rippling through the world economy. So if you think about the next 20, 30 years, think Industrial Revolution, but think Industrial Revolution on steroids, because it's happening about 3 times as fast. So that's that's the challenge we're looking at. That's what we're dealing with here. So this isn't about sort of, a walk in the park. This is really radical and substantial change. And to get that radical change, we really need to bring different actors together. One set of actors is existing companies, large companies. I just popped in some things that we do with Co-op here in Switzerland, where we have been working now for 15 years on driving climate mitigation, driving climate adaptation, driving sustainable agriculture, driving livelihoods in their supply chain worldwide. And it's those kind of projects where this isn't buying and selling certificates, this is doing projects on the ground and measuring what the impact is. And more companies that are setting themselves these science-based targets are then moving into, you actually have to do it, and you actually have to move into your supply chains. It's also about getting investors around the table and getting investors and providing solutions for investors. Because again, if we go back to the Industrial Revolution, yes, some large companies did get the transition, but a lot of the companies that flourish in a situation like that are startups that come in with a sort of different mindset and address this space. And we have been working for over 12 years now with Impact Hub worldwide, working with startups, enabling startups in this space, because we need a lot of these solutions and we need a lot more people working on them. And we now have corporations in over 30 countries working on environment and startups. And that brings me to the end, which is we need to bring around a table or several tables, startups, we need to bring investors, we need to bring large companies there, and really think about how we can join up and how we can accelerate and add credibility to this transition. Because each and every one of us alone, we won't make it. But if we collaborate like we've never collaborated before, then we have a chance and we have huge opportunities coming up here. So thank you to Innovate for Nature. Thank you for all of you for being here and for being part of this journey. And that was what I wanted to talk about. And I'll just end with Together Possible, because that summons it up for us. This isn't hopeless. We can make this transition, but we'll only make it if we work together. Thank you.